Al-Jazeera never talks about Qatar. Never. Arafat, in 1991, sided with Saddam Hussein, the enemy of Saudi Arabia. This is actually the only solution which corresponds with the sociology of the Middle East, with the tribalism, which is deeply, deeply engraved.
Welcome to Made in Israel. My name is Yoni Begelman, and my guest today holds a doctorate in Middle Eastern Studies. He's a lecturer from the Bar Ilan University here in Tel Aviv. He goes on lots of TV interviews on all the major channels here in Israel and also abroad. And we had a lengthy conversation about one of those interesting interviews he had on Al-Jazeera. And I will put up a link to the interview. And we also spoke about, the importance of Jerusalem to Islam. We spoke about the Middle East in general and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular. And I think you will find it very interesting because he doesn't just, call all the problems. He also has a solution, which I think is at least very interesting. Okay, so I hope you enjoy it. Made in Israel, Episode 3, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Hello, Dr. Kedar. Thank you very much for coming in today and talking with me.
Nice to see you.
So, the first video I think I ever saw of yours was the one on Al-Jazeera, when you were speaking to Jamal
Rayan,
yes, the main anchor of Al-Jazeera.
the mastermind of Al-Jazeera.
Is he?
Yeah.
And that was quite an intense interview. I'll put a link below for the interview so anyone can see. And
June 1st, 2008.
Yes.
The eve of Yom Yerushalayim, the Day of Jerusalem, the day which we here in Israel, we celebrate the unification or reunification of Jerusalem in 1967, the Six-Day War, and actually the liberation of the eastern part of the city from the Jordanian occupation. So we celebrated on that day, and in the year of 2008, at that day, June 1st, the Israeli government decided to build some hundreds of apartments in two neighborhoods which were built on places which were annexed to Jerusalem after 1967, after the city was liberated. And of course the Arabs and Muslims were outraged, and the jihad channel Al-Jazeera dedicated some good 15 minutes in its main news bulletin to this issue, which is a hell of a lot of time. At the beginning, they brought footage made by their correspondent in Jerusalem, a lady named Jivara Bderi, and she created this impression that Israel is actually destroying all the Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem in order to establish Jewish neighborhoods on their ruins. Then they brought another Palestinian guy named Tafakji, Khalil Tafakji, who was then in charge of mapping in the PA, and he tells stories about how Israel broadens Jerusalem all over the West Bank, and 1,000 nights and one night. And they looked for an Israeli to bash him on air. And they tried to approach the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the ministry didn't want to get into this discussion. So they asked me if I can come to the studio to be, interviewed in their view in order to bash me on air. Okay, and this clip came, and Jamal Rayan was very angry that such a thing happened. Actually, if you analyze this interview, you can actually see that a news bulletin interview turned into a debate program.
Yeah, it was very intense.
And it was a debate between the interviewee, myself, and the interviewer, Jamal Rayan. He should not have let this happen. He should have controlled the interview. And in my view, he regrets until this very day that he didn't throw me out from the interview right after the first answer, and he tried again and again to attack me from all kinds of other angles. And yes, I must admit that I came ready. On the way to the studio, I rehearsed some monologues, and the monologues which you hear in this interview were prepared. And you know, the first rule in interview is no matter what the question is, you say what you want to say. You convey your message no matter what the question was. Okay, so this is, and until this very day, I thank Jamal Rayan for giving me the pulpit. And it was on live broadcast, it was not recorded, so he couldn't censor it. And since then, by the way, after the program was finished at midnight, this was after 11 p.m., at midnight he called the Al-Jazeera representative in Israel, Walid al-Omari, and gave him a shower why he sent me, why he chose me, and sent me to this debate, to this interview. So Walid told him, look, these are the Israelis. We cannot change them, deal with them. We cannot shove them under the rag. And yes, we have to deal with them. This is how Israelis think. And if you really believe in the, as they say in Arabic, al-ray wal-ray al-akhar, means the opinion and the other opinion. So here is another opinion. Deal with this. I don't think that Jamal Rayan liked it, but Walid al-Omari remained the representative in Israel and the Palestinian Authority as well. This was the last time which Jamal Rayan interviewed me. And 7.5 years later, at the end of 2015, he actually spoke in another interview about, in a monologue, about this event which happened 7.5 years earlier. I personally don't remember what I said yesterday, but the man, as you can see on that clip, remembers line after line, remembers my name, remembers my university, Bar Ilan, although the man interviews every single day dozens of people. Means that this is some kind of shock which he had, only because he couldn't face the facts, which I raised in the original interview, that Jerusalem was ours 3,000 years ago, before Islam came to the world. I mean, when the forefathers of the Muslims of today were drinking wine, burying the daughters alive, and worshipping idols and idolaters, as I said in the... So he still have not yet came over this interview. And by the way, he keeps tweeting on Twitter against me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no doubt. Then, in December 2017, almost 2 years ago, I was invited to a debate program named Al-Ittijal Mu'akis, which is produced by another company which belongs to Faisal Al-Qasem, the one who runs this debate program. And it was about the announcement of the President Trump on Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Later in May 2018, he moved the embassy. And this was after he announced that he is willing or preparing to move the embassy. So it was recorded. And when Faisal Al-Qasem sent the disc to Al-Jazeera to broadcast it, Jamal Rayan knew that, got to know that it's me, and he objected airing it.
Really?
Yeah, he objected airing it.
And did they air it?
One time. Only one time, because the contract between Al-Ittijal Mu'akis and Al-Jazeera mentions that every chapter has to, every episode, which is an hour long, with advertisements, has to be shown 3 times. One almost live on Tuesday evening, in this region. Then again at night for those who live in the Western Hemisphere.
All right.
And again on Wednesday noon for those who live in the Eastern Hemisphere, like Japan, China, so they can also watch it, or Indonesia, Malaysia, so they can watch it in the evening, in their evening. So they, in Al-Jazeera, aired it only once. The minimum which they had, because of the objections of Jamal Rayyan to air it. I heard it from a friend who used to work for Al-Jazeera, and he gave me all kinds of secrets behind the scenes. I never knew what his name was. He was sending me emails with a pseudonym for years.
Wow.
And I know much about Al Jazeera. One day I will publish it.
That's interesting. How did he? You don't know
By
who
email.
it is?
By email.
Yeah, but you don't know who it is.
I don't know. He said that he works for Al Jazeera. He sent some pictures to show the studios from within. And I don't know what he was doing in Al Jazeera. He was writing in Arabic. Apparently he didn't like what goes on in Al Jazeera. And since he understood that I am a persona non grata, especially by Jamal Rayyan, he hated Jamal Rayyan specifically because he kept claiming that Jamal Rayyan is arrogant and people do not love him in Al Jazeera. He tells everybody what to do and what not to do. And of course, he is working according to the dictates from the Qatari house, the family, the ruling family. But nobody loves him. On the contrary, many hate him. So since he and this guy who worked in Al Jazeera understood that Jamal Rayyan doesn't like me, he started to send me all kinds of information about this. One day.
Oh, I'll wait for that. I want to hear that.
Yeah. I already gave it to somebody to keep it for me.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, but it is. But you know, this channel Al Jazeera is a Muslim Brotherhood par excellence. Whenever there is anything connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in the Islamic world, they are behind it. For example, yesterday, and we are talking on September 22nd, 2019. Yesterday, there were a big wave of demonstrations in Egypt against Sisi. And these demonstrations, at least partially, are arranged or sponsored or pushed for by the Muslim Brotherhood, who are in Egypt outlawed. And Al Jazeera is behind the demonstrators against Sisi. Whenever we have issues with Hamas in Gaza, Qatar and Al Jazeera is behind them. Whenever a Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan or in Tunisia, the Nahda movement, they always are behind the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is actually the whole makeup of Al Jazeera. It's a sheer propaganda against Israel, against the West, America particularly, against Westernism, the culture of the West, which is very, very well known, but it's covered because some of their broadcasts, the ladies who appear in Al Jazeera as readers, as broadcasters, they appear with no veil, no hijab, as if this is a secular channel, but this is all meant to deceive the viewer to think that this is a channel which is not Islamist.
Is this in their English version or in
all the
versions? Even when they do it for
the Arabic
countries, they
look. The main Al Jazeera is like 10 channels. There is Al Jazeera Wathaiki, means documentary. Al Jazeera Clip, Al Jazeera Economy, means oil prices and things like this. And the main channel is the Al Jazeera, the news, the main news. Once they had Al Jazeera for Egypt only, right after the Arab Spring started, Then they closed it. But they had also Jazeera for Iraq for a while. So they actually, Al Jazeera, if you analyze what Al Jazeera did through many years since it was established, in late 1996, they were launched in 19. And by the way, Jamal Rayyan was the first face to be shown on Al Jazeera.
He's a Palestinian, supposed to be.
He's Palestinian. He was born in Tulkarm. His parents moved to Jordan when he was a child or teenager, and he became one of the activists of the Muslim Brotherhood. And he attacks Israelis and so forth. His father or grandfather was actually one of the biggest land sellers to Jews, and now he complains that Jews occupied Palestine. Yeah. Okay, so this is Jamal Rayyan, very very problematic guy, but this is our enemy, and we should know our enemy and treat him as. Look, I think that Al Jazeera should be banned from Israel, just like we do not let Al Manar, the channel of Hezbollah, to work in Israel, and so we don't let Al Alam, which is the Iranian channel in Arabic, we don't let them function in Israel. And I think that this is right, and we shouldn't allow such a thing. And Al Jazeera is no less an enemy to Israel compared to Al Manar and Al Alam. And yet, I have absolutely no idea why Al Jazeera is allowed to work in Israel. And I'm not talking about shutting Al Jazeera. That sounds very bad. I say, not let them work here. Let them broadcast whatever they like.
Oh, I understand.
From other places in the world. Why should we give them the stage? You know, what they do, their correspondent in Jerusalem goes near the Knesset, stands to the camera, the Knesset is behind him, and the man tells sheer lies. But since the scenery has the Knesset behind him, it gives the lies a seal of approval. This is true. After all, he speaks from Jerusalem, from the heart of the Zionist entity. Yeah. So how could it be lie? This is what they do. So why should Israel give them the stage, give them the scenery, give them the background of the Knesset? Let them do it from Jordan. Let them do it from Qatar. Yeah. By the way, they never show Qatar on Al Jazeera.
Yes.
They never show the as they call it in Arabic, Rinal Fahish, the corrupt wealth of the Qataris. They never show the skyscrapers. They never show the cars. You know, Mercedes is the car of the poor people in Qatar. You should see Lamborghinis, the Bugattis, the Maseratis, and the Porsche, and all these lucrative cars. McLaren, you can see even the policemen have a Maserati.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, so they never show it. They never show it because if they showed it, everybody will ask, hey, how did you become so rich? And how come we are still so poor in Egypt, in Jordan, in Syria, and in Libya, in Tunisia? And you are so rich, you Arabs. You look, they are constantly talking about others. Al Jazeera never talks about Qatar. Never. Almost never. Maybe when there is some conference of international conference, they would show some things and they will quote the emir, but they don't report about anything which happens in Qatar. Only recently, since the Saudi siege was put on Al Jazeera, on Qatar, they started to talk about how Qatar gets along with the siege and so forth. But until that siege started, like 2 years ago, they never spoke about Qatar. And in order to divert the attention of the people, the viewers, from the wealth in Qatar and the Gulf in general, to Israel, to the United States, to Europeans, to the West, who are to be blamed for the poorness and for the poverty in the Arab world. And this is, outrageous, because their wealth comes from the poverty of the Arab countries. I'll explain to you. Let's say the more poor you are, the more percentage of your income goes on food.
Because you don't have a lot of income.
Because you don't have for clothing, you don't have for car, you don't have for television, and you must eat, otherwise you die. The richer you are, the less is the percentage of your income which goes for food. Even if you buy lucrative food, yet you have much money for cars, for airplanes, for whatever you have. Okay. Now, the poor people who pay all or almost all of their income on food, they use energy, because the food has much energy in it, to bake, to plow. Okay, everything which connected in producing food is energy. Energy comes from the Gulf. Means the energy in a food is estimated like 40%. 40% of the cost of the food comes from energy, is spent on energy. Means that the poor people in Egypt are paying 40% of their small income to the Gulf to get the energy. Means that the wealth of the Qataris and the other Gulf Emirates comes from the poverty of the Egyptians, of the Jordanians, of the Tunisians, those who do not have oil. And this is mind-boggling. People are not aware of this fact. And this is something which Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, he understood, and he kept shouting, "Naft al-Arab lil-Arab," means let the oil of the Arabs belong to all the Arabs. Means, why should I buy from you Arabs? I'm an Arab. Why shouldn't you give me our oil for free? I am poor. I have to feed who knows how many millions of Egyptians. Why should I spend so much money in order to what? To make you richer? You don't know even what to do with the money. Especially those days in the 50s and the 60s. They didn't know what to do with the money. So, and they, means the Gulf, Qatar and the others, they heard these slogans of Naft al-Arab lil-Arab, and he was actually connected with the Soviets those days, so they went to the Americans to protect them from the wrath of Egypt and the other Soviet directed countries in the Middle East, like Syria, Libya under Gaddafi and so forth. So this is actually what they try to divert the attention of the poor Arabs from the wealth of the Gulf Emirates, Qatar included, and this is why they concentrate all the time on Israel and America and others, and they never show the Qatari and the other Emirates streets, lest those poor Arabs see this wealth and ask, well, where do you have this wealth from? Who pays you? It's us actually. Okay, so this is how Al-Jazeera, by the way, Al-Jazeera in this case is not significantly different from other Gulf channels who usually do not report about what goes on in their Emirates in order not to show the wealth which these people have. So, unfortunately, the diversity of income in the Arab world is tremendous. You see on one side billionaires who don't even know how many billions they have in the Gulf, and you see people who live on $0.25 per day in Egypt and in other Arab countries, not to mention in Syria, which is also something which Al-Jazeera incited. Look, Al-Jazeera, since 1996, when it was launched, it delegitimized the Arab regimes. I would describe look, the Arab world anyway, the regimes are illegitimate, but Al Jazeera added incitement against those regimes by calling them the regimes of 99% under the zero. Because they were like Assad, Father Assad has every 5 years referendum. So he was the only candidate. So he always won in 99%, point something.
Yeah.
Okay? So Al Jazeera was calling them the rulers of 99% under the zero. I mean, there is no such a thing, but they created it in order to delegitimize them, and many other dictatoriat, as they call them. And they actually surrounded the barrel of explosives, named the Arab world, with gas fumes of incitement. All it needed is one spark, which by chance came from Tunisia in the end of 2010.
The guy who burned himself.
Muhammad Bouazizi, who burned himself and his town and his country and the whole Arab world. Now, who brought it from arena to arena? Al Jazeera. Because when the demonstration started in Sidi Bouzid, in his town, Al Jazeera aired clips which were taken in these demonstrations, time and again, like a chain. So demonstrations came to Tunis, and the demonstrations actually demonstrated in front of the Al Jazeera bureau, so they can be filmed. So they filmed them from the window, and they showed it non-stop. They were talking. Now, and Azmi Bshara, who was then already in Al Jazeera, the commentator on the Arab world, kept asking, okay, now Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali, the president of Tunisia, ran away. It was the end of January 2011. Who is next? Who is next in line?
Many came.
And it started in the 25th of January in Egypt. It started right after that in Libya. And in March 2011, it started in Syria. Then it had also its demonstrations in Bahrain, which the Saudis crashed. Then there was a beginning in Algeria, which was crashed. Then it started in Yemen. And Al Jazeera actually, by showing these demonstrations day after day, night after night, people got the idea and they ran to the streets wherever they were. Because if they say, if the Egyptians can, and look, in Egypt, Mubarak survived less than 3 weeks. The demonstration started in 25th of January 2011, and he was ousted by Tantawi on February 11. Means like 17 days. Okay, not even 3 weeks. And so people in Syria saw, it works so easy. In Tunisia, a month, and in Egypt, not even 3 weeks. Maybe we can do it here. And it started in Daraa, in the southern Syria, but it continued in Syria, unlike their plans, because in Syria the regime is different. But in Yemen as well, it started and it continued until Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president, was hit by an RPG rocket which was launched into the mosque where he was praying. So this is what happened. But definitely Al Jazeera was the I would say the carrier of the spark from arena to arena. And people actually accused Al Jazeera later for actually bringing the situation which Daesh came. Means the ISIS. Because of the deterioration of the regimes in both Iraq and Syria, this enabled ISIS to turn or to start from Al-Qaeda of Iraq and to turn into ISIS. And this is something which came mainly because of the incitement of Al Jazeera against the regimes and for Islamism. So some people took it to the end and they established ISIS. Of course, ISIS had the support of Turkey at the beginning. Without it, it wouldn't be existing. And apparently Iran also supported it in a way or another at the beginning when it was against the Sunnis in Iraq, those who didn't join it. But later, when they understood that the genie came out of the bottle in fights against Assad, when they came to Syria, they stopped it, the support. And look, the Iranians also always play a very interesting game between Sunnis. Iran supports Hamas, and Hamas is a Sunni organization. Okay, so Iran knows how to manipulate between Sunnis in order to have Sunnis fight with Sunnis. This is why Saudi Arabia is in a fight with Hamas, in the media mainly. They kicked out from Saudi Arabia the representatives of Hamas recently. And there is actually a big hatred between the Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood in general. This is why the Saudis supported Sisi in July 2013 when he ousted Morsi.
Yeah, he was from the Brotherhood.
Right. Morsi was supported by Qatar, and by the Obama administration.
Yeah, the West saw him as a legitimate democratic ruler,
Yeah.
and Sisi they see as another dictator.
Despot.
Yeah.
And the reason I published an article about this, why is the State Department so in front of the Muslim Brotherhood? What happened is that since September 11, Americans understood that Muslims hate them. And it puzzled them. Why do they hate us? Is it because of what we do? Or is it because of what we are? And there's a big difference, because if it is because of what we Americans do, we can change maybe what we do. But if it is because of what we are, this is much harder to be changed. And in 2005, they asked a group of some dozens of scholars all over the world. They directed this question, including myself. I got this, they asked me to write an essay about this question: why Muslims hate the West. Sub-question is it because of what we are, or is it because of what we do? So I wrote a whole essay about this. You can read it online, about gender and family issues which cause tension between Islam and the West. Mainly because the West is permissive when it comes to gender and family issues, sex issues. The West considers the women to be equal, while Islam is not. The West promotes all kinds of new gender definitions which Islam rejects. All these things about gender, the Islam cannot accept polygamy, bigamy, marrying within the family, which is well known in Islamic societies, means cousins, forced divorce, marriage of young girls, which is unacceptable in Western societies. All these things about gender and family issues, which create a resentment in Islamic societies. And I wrote this essay, and apparently there are many other researchers who actually talked about more politics. You support Israel, you Americans, you support the Jordanian regime and the Egyptian regime and all these despotic regimes which we don't like. And of course, and this is what you do. I talked about what you are. Since the West promotes the status of women and so forth, it's actually, they hate us, means the Westerns, because of what we are. Many of those who were asked about why do they hate us, concentrated on what you Americans do, means supporters. So the State Department decided to shift the support from the regimes to some Islamic organization which is not terroristic, which is acceptable, which is wanted by the people, and they looked for and they found the Muslim Brotherhood. Because the Muslim Brotherhood actually care for the people, especially in Egypt. They care for the needy people, those who live in unplanned neighborhoods. They call it in Arabic ashwaiyat, without electricity, without running water, without sewage, without medical services, without education, almost without anything. Just live on boxes, wooden boxes, and make $50 per day, if at all. And they live in such places without any facilities, which they of livelihood. And the Muslim Brotherhood would care for them, bring them water, give them food, give them health care, education, jobs. They try to find for them. And they actually do what the government does not do for these needy people. So, since they are such good organization, let's shift our support, our Americans, let's shift the support to the Muslim Brotherhood. They will care for the people. In the American embassy in Egypt, there was a person who was actually the liaison officer between the State Department and the Muslim Brotherhood. Behind the back of Mubarak. All those years, this representative was the link to support, to encourage, to organize, and to be the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and
the Obama administration.
And the Obama administration. Maybe it was even before the Obama administration. I would not overrule this. And they were actually waiting for the opportunity. And here comes the Arab Spring, and Tantawi takes the regime, and he prepares for elections, which actually were in mid 2012, the end of June of 2012. There are rumors that Morsi did not win. And somebody from Washington, possibly President Obama, called Tantawi, the ruler of Egypt, to make sure that the Muslim Brotherhood won.
Really?
To make sure.
Is that rumors?
There are rumors, and these rumors actually are based on the fact that the results of the elections were announced like hours after the elections. How can you count 90 million, no, it's not 90 million voters.
Yeah, but
Let's say
still.
40 million voters, if we if we don't calculate the kids, like 40 million people who had the right to vote. Excuse me, okay? It can be. And he won. Okay? So, and he became the president. And of course, the Americans supported him, but they asked him not to cancel the peace agreement with Israel, because they were afraid that if this peace agreement is cancelled, many investors will not invest in Egypt, because there might be again a war against Israel. So, in order to stabilize the economy, which was very important for them, they said, okay, you are in power, although the Muslim Brotherhood kept promising, once we come to power, we will cancel the peace with Israel. They did it from 1979, since the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt was signed. The Muslim Brotherhood swore thousands of times, we are going to abolish this agreement. We don't agree with this. Israel has no right to exist, even in 1 square centimeter. We'll cancel it. And they didn't. Why? Because of the American pressure. They didn't want the deterioration of the situation, maybe to a war between Egypt and Israel. So, but Morsi Atzmo never said Israel. He said the Zionist entity, like the last enemy. He said the Zionist entity. Very rarely you heard him say Israel. Okay, so then Morsi was ousted by Sisi 1 year after he was elected, at the beginning of July 2013. And here is the catch. The Emir of Qatar, the former Emir before Tamim,
Yes.
his father, resigned like 10 days before the end of June 2013. Why? He knew already that Sisi is preparing to get rid of Morsi. And since Morsi was his project as a Muslim Brotherhood supporter, he did not want to be associated with the failure of his policy through Al-Jazeera to have the Muslim Brotherhood in power. He didn't want to be there when the Muslim Brotherhood president is kicked out by Sisi. Now, how Al-Jazeera knew about this? With the years, Al-Jazeera became not only a news agency, but also an intelligence agency. Because anyone who has anything against his own government leaked it to Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera became Arab Leaks. And why? Because they were using all this information against the rulers. And they were keeping the information in their safe to the day which they need it against the ruler. This is Al Jazeera. And there are many signs about this, because whenever Qatar had some issues with the country, like Jordan once, they took out from the safe an information about the ruler, or the King Abdullah in that case, as some kind of a punishment for what you said or what you did against us, Qatar. It happened to Jordan, it happened in Egypt. By the way, this way, in Egypt, Mubarak kept closing Al Jazeera, but opening it again like after a week. Why? Because apparently they were threatening him that they will air an information which they have against him. So, under the threat of Al Jazeera, Mubarak had to reopen Al Jazeera whenever he closed it. Maybe here in Israel, the government refrains from closing Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera knows too much, maybe, about some people in Israel, and those people who have influence are afraid that this information will leak, will be aired if they close Al Jazeera. Maybe this actually explains why Israelis are chickens when it comes to Al Jazeera. Maybe. I don't know. I just give it an assumption, and who knows? Maybe it is correct.
So I wanted to know, how did Jerusalem become the third most important city in Islam?
Well, this is a long story, but I hope to be able to fold it into the time which you give me. First of all, Jerusalem is not holy for all the Muslims. The Shia, which are like 1 of 6 of Islam, like 250 million people today, because Islam is more or less a billion and a half, so 1 of 6 is 250 million, who are Shia. Traditionally, they have nothing with Jerusalem, because their third place in holiness after Mecca and Medina is the town of Najaf in southern Iraq. In Najaf, Ali, the founder of the Shia, is buried, and many of the sages of the Shia, for many generations. And this is the third place in holiness for the Shia traditionally. Shia started to talk about Jerusalem only after the Khomeini revolution in 1979, while Shia exists since the death of Muhammad, since 632, when the struggle over the succession started, and this actually what created the Shia. So first of all, we have to put it on the table that Jerusalem is not holy for all the Muslims.
Only for the Sunnis.
Only for the Sunnis. And if there is something in difference between Sunni and Shia, it might very possibly be connected to politics, because the whole rift between the Sunni and the Shia is about politics. Who was the legitimate successor of Muhammad when he died in 632 CE? So, yes, it is a matter of politics. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. Other cities do, but not Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not. And the whole sanctity of Jerusalem is based on one verse which talks about glory to Allah, who took his servant at night from the holy mosque, which is Mecca, to the further mosque, Al-Aqsa, Arabic, which we, means the deity, which we blessed its surroundings in order to show him our wonders, since he, means Allah, sees everything and hears everything. This is the verse in the Quran, chapter 17. The Aqsa Mosque today is in Jerusalem, or they say it is Jerusalem. Originally it was not. Originally, according to Islamic sources, ancient Islamic sources, it is near a village named Ju'rana, which is until this very day to the northeast from Mecca, like 8 or 10 kilometers.
That was the furthest away mosque?
No, what happened is that this Muhammad had a group of Muslims who lived in this village, and they built 2 mosques near the village, on two sides, 2 banks of a valley, which was near the village. One was on the closer valley, on the closer bank, so they called it the closer mosque, Al-Masjid Al-Adna. And the other mosque was on the further bank, so they called it Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, means the further mosque. Okay? And these 2 mosques, Al-Adna and Al-Aqsa, the closer and the further, were near Jawrana. And this was in the days of Muhammad. So this dream, or this vision, which he had documented in chapter 17, blessed be Allah who took his servant from the holy mosque, which is Mecca, to the further mosque, which is actually that further mosque, which was further from Jawrana compared to another mosque which was closer to Jawrana. This is according to many Islamic sources from the 1st and 2nd century of Islam. This is the original Al-Aqsa. Muhammad died in 632. 50 years later, in 682, the capital was already in Damascus under the Umayyads, the dynasty of the Umayyads, and the people who lived in Mecca rebelled against the central regime in Damascus. The rebel, actually the leader of the rebellion, was a guy named Abdallah ibn Zubayr. His rebellion erupted in 682 CE, means 50 years after Muhammad died. And because of this rebellion, he didn't allow the people of Damascus and the Sham, means this area of the Middle East, means what today is Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. He didn't let the people from this area to come to Hajj, to Mecca, because of various reasons. So they looked for an alternative place for Hajj. So they took Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was holy for Jews, was holy for Christians. Many of Jews and Christians converted to Islam in order to get rid of taxes, like the jizya, which were imposed on Jews and Christians. So the notion and the awareness that Jerusalem is a holy city came into the Islamic street by the conversion of those Jews and Christians to Islam. So the Umayyads assumed that if they take Jerusalem as the place of pilgrimage instead of Mecca, it will be viewed as legitimate decision. However, they cannot rewrite the Quran because people know the Quran by heart. So they cannot forge the Quran to insert Jerusalem into the Quran. So they took this verse, blessed be Allah who took his servant from the holy mosque to the further mosque, and they claimed that the further mosque actually is in Jerusalem.
And this was 50 years after
50 years after Muhammad died. I would say fake news of the 7th century. In order to create Jerusalem, or to turn Jerusalem into an alternative place for pilgrimage for people that will come to Hajj to Jerusalem. Therefore, they built the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, more or less in the middle of the court, so the people can surround it, they go around it, as they do in Mecca, around the Kaaba. And they have the stone, means the Kaaba, and here they have the stone, the rock, Dome of the Rock, more or less the same idea, and this is the whole thing. And for like 10 years, they tried to divert the Hajj to Jerusalem. If they succeeded or not, I don't know, because the whole thing about this was erased from the Islamic, or most of this was erased from the Islamic sources. But those years, they actually created many hadith, many oral traditions, of course, as if the Prophet Muhammad said them, which actually elevate Jerusalem to a degree above Mecca, in order to convince people, like the prayer in Jerusalem is more significant and more important and more holy than a prayer in Mecca. Jerusalem, if you sleep in Jerusalem, you'll be cured from all kinds of illnesses and problems. Jerusalem is the place for those who will fight for Islam forever, unlike other places. Means all the thousands of hadiths were created by the hadith factory of Yazid bin Muawiyah, the caliph of the Umayyads in those days, in order to convince the people that, of course, Jerusalem is not in the Quran, but in the hadith, there is so much about Jerusalem, so come to Jerusalem instead of Mecca. This is actually the source of all these hadiths which were concocted during these like 10 years between 682 and 91 or 2 in order to divert the Hajj to Jerusalem. Later, because of these stories, many rulers and many commanders, when they passed through Jerusalem, they built something or did something in the Temple Mount, added some dome or something, or a place to drink or whatever, in order to have their name on that place. But originally it was not holy, because there is actually a tradition which tells us about the occupation of Jerusalem in 638 by the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. He had in his entourage a Jew named Ka'b, who actually was the mentor of Muhammad. Muhammad heard from him about Judaism, and he learned from Ka'b much about from the Bible, from the Mishnah, from the Midrashim, from the Talmud. And this is why the Quran is so replete with quotations from the Bible, from the Mishnah, from the Talmud, from the Midrashim. Because he was influenced by this Jew, and actually what he learned from the Jew. By the way, the ban on eating pig, it is evidently comes from Judaism, not from Christianity even, because there were no pigs in the Arab Peninsula.
So it was easy to ban them.
Muhammad never saw a pig, so how can he ban a pig if he didn't see this? Okay, it shows that it comes from Judaism and many other things. The resemblance, if you read, for example, chapter 12 of the Quran, the chapter about Joseph. And the story, which is with the brothers who threw him to the pit and sold him to Egypt, and the father who gave him the garment, and all these things. All these stories from Genesis 37 to 48 are in chapter 12 of the Quran. And many other things like the creation and the Garden of Eden, and the flood, and man, and Solomon and David and the Israelites in Egypt, and Israel and Egypt, and Israel and the Israelites in the desert, and everything from the Bible is in the Quran. This is why, by the way, the Meccans, when they heard what Muhammad told them, means all these stories, they knew all these stories from the Jews. So they accused him for recycling Jewish and Christian stories. Asatir al-awwalin, as it says in Arabic, means the legends or the fables of the first ones, of the former ones. Means all you do is copy and paste. And this accusation that the whole Quran is no more than a copy and paste of Jewish and Christian sources appears in the Quran 11 times. Means the Quran actually quotes the people of Mecca telling Muhammad, or accusing Muhammad for plagiarizing Jewish and Christian sources. Not in vain, because of the resemblance. Okay? So, this is why he had issues with the Jews. Because actually Judaism is viewed as the biggest threat on Islam, because Islam is viewed as no more than a copy of Judaism. So this is why the Jews and Christians and the infidels are always together in the Quran. And there are many verses about bad attitudes to Jews. Some of them are good, but most of them are bad. Like Jews are descendants of apes and swines. Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. Jews are prophet killers. Jews are those upon whom the wrath of Allah rests, according to the first chapter of the Quran, the Exegesis. So, and you could very easily see that the Quran is some kind, the Islam is actually in some kind of polemic with Judaism and Christianity, which were the challenge, because people apparently made fun out of Muhammad because what he brought, and saying that Gabriel, the angel, was giving it to him at night, it actually was Ka'b who was teaching him. So Ka'b lived after Muhammad, and he came to Jerusalem with Umar, the second caliph, in 638, 6 years after Muhammad died. And when he entered Jerusalem with Umar, led by Sophronius, the Byzantine last bishop of Jerusalem, who surrendered to the Muslims. When they were about to enter the Temple Mount, Ka'b took off his shoes because it's a holy place. So Umar, the caliph, forced him to put his shoes on, because he said, "You, Ka'b, you are trying to push Jewish ideas into Islam. This place is not holy at all."
Okay.
This was in 638. Mm-hmm. Jerusalem was sanctified only 44 years later by the Umayyads, not by Umar. So when you really analyze the Islamic sources, you can see the concoctions. You see how the holiness was actually a tool in the hands of the Umayyads against the Hashemites, the former Hashemites, who were in Mecca and Medina. There were two clans in the Quraysh tribe. Later, in 750, another clan, the Abbasids, will take the regime from the Umayyads and will move the capital to their town in Baghdad. and the Abbasid dynasty, and they will rule Islam until 1258, when the Mongols invaded and toppled it. So this actually, the whole thing about Jerusalem was about politics inside Islam, struggles between clans, between centers, between towns, between groups, and the whole thing about this is now today, of course, the Sunnis believe that Jerusalem is holy, and because of the Palestinians, the centrality of Jerusalem today is much more obvious than Mecca and Medina. Because here there is a struggle, there is no struggle. This is one of the reasons why the Saudis are so angry at the Palestinians. Because the Palestinians actually grabbed the attention of the Islamic world to think that Jerusalem is more important today than Mecca and Medina, because here there is Ard al-Ribat, means this is the land of the front of the fight against the Jews, against the Israelis. In Mecca there is no fight. Mecca is not important. Here we have to invest the money and the time and the effort and the blood and the jihad. So this is how Jerusalem became, I would say, more central to the Islamic world than Mecca and Medina. Mecca, of course, they have the pilgrimage and so forth, but as a place of attention, of struggle, Jerusalem definitely beat Mecca and Medina together. There are other reasons why the Saudis are against the Palestinians today. One of the other reasons is the fact that many Palestinians actually side with the Iranians. Iranians support Hamas. Yeah. And this comes already to the rift between the Saudis and the Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in general. And this is something which I think many people do not understand. After all, the Saudis are, let's say, religious Muslims, and Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood are religious Muslims. Both are Sunnis. So why do they hate each other? Why did Saudi Arabia support Sisi in 2013 when he ousted Morsi? Saudi Arabia supported him, gave him like $5.5 billion instead of American support, because Obama stopped the support. So the Saudis jumped in and gave the support to Sisi instead of the Americans. Why? The Islam in Saudi Arabia is totally opposite from the Islam of the Muslim Brotherhood. Islam in Saudi Arabia is a religion which supports the regime. The regime actually stands on two legs. One leg is the Saud family, which is the power, and the others are the religious authorities of Saudi Arabia, the Ibn Baz family, Ibn al-Athimin, and more. They actually, what they do, these religious authorities, they publish all the time fatwas, books, booklets, whatever, sermons, which support the regime, which support their religion or their kind of Islam is Islam which supports the regime. While the Muslim Brotherhood, wherever they are against the regime. They are revolutionary Islam. While in Saudi Arabia, it is the state Islam. You cannot bridge between those who take the same texts in order to support the regime and those who take the same texts to produce religious products which are against the regime. And this is actually the clash between the Wahhabi Saudi Islam of today and the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is why this clash is so harsh, and this is why the hatred between the Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhoods or Muslim organizations like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is so harsh. To the degree that the Saudis actually support somebody who is really secular, like Sisi, against the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013. And here, the Hamas actually is with Iran.
Yeah. No, Iran, I don't understand at all how they came into this. They are Shiite. They theoretically shouldn't.
You're right. You're right. Definitely. How come the Iranian Shia supports the Hamas Sunnah? And here you have to understand how they think. The Hamas actually were supported by people in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar and in the Emirates, people who donated money until 2001. And then came the September 11 terrorist attacks on New York and Washington. And America understood that behind terror there is money. And since they consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, everyone who is caught trafficking money to Hamas cannot have business in the United States. And every bank which transfers money to Hamas cannot have any business in the States. And a bank which cannot make business in the United States cannot be a bank. So all the donations which came through the banking system from the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia, actually was stopped. So Hamas went to Saddam Hussein, who was still in power those days, in 2001 and 2, and they whined that they need money. So he gave the money in cash, in a way or another. It came to Gaza, through the tunnels from Sinai. But Saddam Hussein also was ousted by the Americans and their allies in April of 2003, in the invasion to Iraq. So Hamas again found themselves without supporter. So the Iranians said, we will support you. Why? To show the Saudis and the others, you betrayed your brethren, your Hamas brethren, we will support them. In order to show how bad the Saudis are, the Iranians jumped in with the money. And this is what they do until this very day, through Hezbollah at the beginning and then directly. So it's actually the pose between the Sunni and the Shia here. They support the Sunnah in order to show how bad the Saudis are. The hatred between the Saudis and the Palestinians today is the result also of the attitude of the Palestinians. Look, a Saudi blogger visited Jerusalem like 2 months ago, and Palestinians spat at him in the face because he supports Israel. And this was a big humiliation against the guy, Muhammad Saud. And Saudis saw it and they were outraged, totally outraged, flabbergasted about the Palestinians. This is how you spit at your brethren, the Arabs brethren who supported you for many years? Okay, so this is, look, Arafat in 1991 sided with Saddam Hussein, the enemy of Saudi Arabia. When he invaded Kuwait in August of 1990. And as a result, 500,000 of Palestinians were kicked out from Kuwait after the Kuwaitis gained their country back. And many people who supported their families in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, Palestinians, actually were jobless for a long time. And the economic situation in these places actually deteriorated because of this, what happened with Arafat who supported. So, since the Palestinians are being viewed as the traitors in too many cases, and yes, the Arabs know that many Palestinians sold their land to Jews, and now they are crying, help us to liberate our lands. Another thing which I think we should mention here is the hatred between the Saudis and the Iranians, which is actually a multi-layer hatred. What people are aware of is the fact that these two countries are trying to have hegemony on the Gulf and the sources of oil and gas. And Iran is Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunnah. Okay, these are all correct. And definitely a reason for a hatred and many other things connected to these issues. However, there is something which
people are not aware of. And the historical background of the hatred between Saudi Arabia and Persia, means the Persians, the core of Iran. The Arabs, means the Muslims, defeated the Persian army in 636 CE. Means when the Muslims came out from the Arab Peninsula and they occupied Persia and parts of Byzantium. And the Persians those days were Zoroastrians. They believed in two gods, the good and the evil, and means infidels, and they were corrupt. But the Persians, for thousands of years, were professors of mathematics, physics, chemistry, geometry, stereometry, and they had actually a computer, abacus.
Oh, yeah. No.
And they knew how to calculate everything on it. Logarithms, sinus, cosinus, everything which is needed to calculate everything. They knew about the orbits and the stars and the planets and the sun and the moon and the length of the orbit of the sun and the moon. They knew before many other nations knew about this, and they knew how to calculate everything. But they were corrupt. They were drinking, they were immersed in moral issues, corrupt. And therefore they couldn't resist in front of the Arabs or the Muslims who came, totally illiterate, but they knew very well how to use the sword. And the big army of the Persians was defeated in 3 days by the Arabs. And here the Arabs have millions of Persians under their rule. They didn't, why kill them? Let's sell them to slavery. And they sold them, family after family. They took a family to the street, to the marketplace, stripped them off totally, to show the merchandise. So one man bought the man, another man bought the woman, another man bought the daughter, and another man bought the son and the daughter and son. Okay, and you know exactly what they bought the girls and the women for. Okay, to enslave them in a way which women are being enslaved. The Persians, until this very day, they never forgot and never forgave the Arabs for the way which they sold them to slavery. The Arabs actually call them mawali. Mawali means people whom you buy, property, which you buy in plural, properties, because they bought them in the street, the men and the women, the girls and the boys, and this is deeply engraved into the communal memory of the Persians about the Arabs. This is one of the reasons why Persians call Arabs lizard eaters. It's kind of denigrating epithet. Okay, the Arabs call the Persians Ajam, people who do not know how to speak, because they know how to speak Arabic, so they don't know how to speak. Okay, as if. But the mutual stereotypes between the two nations, the Arabs and the Persians, is so big. And this is in the background of what happens between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Who knows about this? Who heard about this? But here, what can I do? History in the Middle East plays a major role in current issues, unlike in the West. In the West, people know how to open new page, how to look forward, how to look for good life, how to make life better, how to create situation which everybody can cooperate with each other in spite of the history and we all remember the history of Europe. Only 80 years ago, Europe was a hell, and Germans, actually those who created this hell, today they are the engine which pulls the European train, the economic train, and they carry countries on their shoulders, like Greece and other. Okay, so the West knows how to not to forget, but to look forward,
To move on. Yeah.
to move on, to get out of it and start making life rather than making death. Here in the Middle East,
In the time that we have, wait.
here in the Middle East, people still fight on the legacy of Muhammad, who was the right successor. Ali, those who support him, the Shia, or the Sunnah, those who took the those Arabs and Persians are fighting today the continuation of the fight of 636 CE.
I wanted to touch in the time that we have on the idea of Arab countries, Arab nationalism. I know that you, if I'm not mistaken, your opinion is that these are not holding water. The lands that the British, the French created, Iraq, Syria, Libya,
Artificial states.
And
look,
and from there, if we could segue to Israel and the Palestinians, and your thoughts on how to maybe
solve the problem. Look, the Arab world roughly is divided to two kinds of states. One kind is the failing states, and the other kind is the successful states. The failing states are Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, Algeria, potentially Jordan as well, more or less these countries. While the successful countries are Kuwait, Qatar, and the 7 Emirates of the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, Fujairah, and so forth. The failing states are failing because their societies are conglomerates of clans, of ethnic groups like Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Berbers, and others, Armenians. There are also religious groups like Muslims and Christians and Yazidis and Sabais and Mandays and Druze and Alawis and many other religions, and sects, Sunnah and Shia and Christian denominations, and almost every religion is divided to some sects. When the modern states were created, like Iraq in the 20s of the previous century, Syria in the 40s, Lebanon in the 40s as well, when these countries were created, the colonialists who created them, like Britain and France, hoped that with the time, all these groups, the tribal groups and the religious groups and sectarian and ethnic groups, will abandon their loyalty or loyalties to the traditional groups and will all embrace the new identity of the modern state, Iraq, Syria, and so forth, and will all sit around one fire and sing Kumbaya together. The problem is it didn't happen. In Iraq, for example, Arabs remained loyal to their Arab heritage, while Kurds in the north and Turkmens and Persians who also live in Iraq remained loyal to their national tradition. In the religious issues, Muslims remained loyal to Islam, while Christians and Yazidis and other Shubaks and Mandays and Sabais remained loyal to their religions. Tribes remained tribes. They don't marry with each other because every tribe views the other tribe as the enemy. And sects, Shia and Sunnah, usually do not marry each other in many places. So there was no nation created by the state, no Iraqi nation, because the citizens are sharply divided along these axes of tribe or tribalism, ethnicism, religious issues, and sectarianism. So the same thing it is in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Algeria, potentially in Jordan as well. The regimes in these countries is always held in the hands of one of the minorities. The Alawis in Syria, who are like 10%, the Dulaimis of Saddam, who are less than 1%, Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen put his tribe in every junction of decisions. The same thing was with the Qaddafis in Libya, and so forth. So the regime is a dictatorship, because who wants them? This minority which took us over. That's why they never had real elections. Or they had a referendum with one candidate who will renew himself. So, the state actually is viewed as the enemy of the majority of the people, who do not belong to the clan or to the tribe or to the ethnic group or the religious or the sectarian group of the ruler. So he puts his brothers and sisters and cousins and second cousins wherever he wants, and kicks out all the others, and he rules them with a dictatorial means. This is why these states are illegitimate, and the people actually waited for an opportunity to get rid of this regime which nobody likes. And this is why these are failing states with oil. The oil doesn't help. In Libya, there is a lot of oil. In Iraq, a lot of oil. Also, Yemen and Sudan are oil-producing countries, yet the oil did not bring good life to these countries, because people are fighting each other on every issue, like issues between tribes, between sects, between ethnic groups, and so forth. The Gulf Emirates are successful states, not because of the oil, which most of them have. Dubai, for example, has no oil and no gas. Maybe 1% of the economy of Dubai is based on oil and gas. Dubai is business. Means that, and the question is why? Why are these countries stable and rich, while others, Iraq and Syria and so forth, are dysfunctional and poor? The reason is the makeup of the society. In each and every one of these Gulf Emirates, the main group is one tribe. In Kuwait is Al-Sabah. Al means family or tribe. Al-Sabah in Kuwait. In Qatar it's Al-Thani. This is the name of the family. In Abu Dhabi it's Al-Nihyan. And every one of them is one Al, means one tribe. And the rulers, not the rulers, the leaders, are the traditional leaders of the tribe. And you know, according to the tradition in the Arab world, if there is a shortage of water, the leader will be the last to eat. He will be the last to drink. Why? Because he has responsibility for all the kids and all the girls and all the women and all the men of the tribe, because he is the head of the tribe. And these are the heads of states, of the Gulf states. Legitimate. They know the rules of the social game, and the state law reflects the law of the tribe. So the state is legitimate, the regime is legitimate, and the state is ours, means it's our state. So nobody fights anyone, and they all cooperate for the good of everybody. If they have oil, they sell the oil and the good money. If they don't have oil, like Dubai, they have free trade zones, they have lucrative housing, they have attractions for tourists, okay, and they have business all over the world, like Dubai World. So they make money out of the sand if they don't have oil. Yeah. So this is the secret. If you establish a state on one consolidated group, you get a heaven on earth with oil or without. While if you base a state on a conglomerate, on multiple groups of tribes, ethnic groups, religious and sectarian groups like Iraq and Syria, you get a hell on earth, even with oil, which burns maybe with the oil. So this is, So if we understand this, how to build an Arab state means base it on the clan or clans who live together in peace. This actually would lead me to the solution between us and the Palestinians. We should establish 8 Palestinian Emirates in the cities of Judea and Samaria, in addition to Gaza. Gaza, first of all, is a state already for more than 12 years, since June 2007, when Hamas took Hamas over by force. They have a government, legitimate. They have police. They have an army. They have military industry. They know how to launch missiles. They have borders, very important. They have judicial system. They have education system. Every organ of a state, Gaza has. So if something looks like a state, functions like a state, and actually is a state on the ground, it's not a duck. It's a state. So we have to recognize the fact that Gaza is a state. Likewise, we should establish emirates, one in the Arab part of Hebron, for the clans of Hebron, which are the Kawasme, Natche, Tamimi, Abu Snena, and Jabri. Jabri actually the leader. Another emirate in Jericho for the Arikat tribe live there. They don't move to other places because in their homeland in Jericho they feel at home, while in other places they feel strangers. Another emirate in Ramallah for the Barghouti family, and Abu Ain, and there are 2 more clans there, like Tawil. Another emirate in Nablus, Shechem, for the Masri, Tukan, and Shak'a tribes. Another one in Tulkarem for the Karmis, and another one in Kalkilia, and the last one in Jenin for the local clans. Israel should remain forever in the rural areas, offer Israeli citizenship to the villagers, while the people who live in the cities will be citizens of the cities, of the city-states. Every city will have peace agreement with Israel, which arranges every aspect of life: transportation, water supply, electricity, sewage, whatever. It will be in bilateral agreement with Israel, and Israel will have bilateral agreements with all these 8 emirates separately. There will not be territorial contiguity between these emirates, in order to make sure that we don't have another Hamastan in Judea and Samaria. We have already learned the lesson from Gaza, and we should not repeat the same thing in Judea and Samaria. This will give like 90% of the Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria independence, because they are living in the Emirates, in the city Emirates, while Israel will annex or will give Israelis or offer Israeli citizenship to some 10% of the population, those who live in the villages. And Israel will stay in the villages forever. And this is actually the only solution which corresponds with the sociology of the Middle East, with the tribalism, which is deeply, deeply engraved into the culture of the Middle East. Because we live in a desert you have to live with a family, because you have to defend your source of water. So for millions of years, since people started to live in this desert, the desert actually shaped the society as well. This is why living as a family is a must. You cannot live by yourself, because the individual is weak vis-a-vis the group which will come to take his water. So this is why to live in a clan in the Middle East is a necessity. You cannot give up on it. So if this is the cornerstone of the sociology of the Middle East, why go against it? Let's go with it. And it works, as we see in the Gulf. And we do have states, like 9 states, based on the clans, functioning tremendously nicely. Why not emulate this model here within the Palestinians? Because they're also a tribal society. A girl from Hebron, if she is 20 years old and she is healthy and everything is okay with her, she has usually no option to get married to a boy from Nablus, because they are not from us. The language is different, the mindset is different, the customs are different. The whole thing between Hebron and Shechem is different. So to say that there is one consolidated nation, named the Palestinian nation, is as accurate to say that there is an Iraqi nation, or Syrian nation, or Libyan nation, or Sudani nation, or Yemenite nation. They are all hallucinated nations made by the West, because the people are much more loyal to the tribe, or to the sectarian group, or the religious group, rather than being loyal to the state. And I think it's time that people start learning about the Middle East, learning about the history of the Middle East, learning about the history of Islam, and learn about the powers which shook the Middle East from within for centuries, since the 7th century, when Islam came to the world and came to this region, and imposed itself and its rulings all over the Middle East and all over on every field of life. And that's why Islam and its ideas are actually the name of the political game in the Middle East, even within communities which are not Islamic, like Druze and maybe Christians as well. The question is, how do we Israelis and Jews want to live in this country? Do we want to live according to the Western ideas about what might work in Europe? Or should we learn more about the Middle East to understand what works in the Middle East and why, in order to arrange our life with our neighbors in a way which will be acceptable by them, of course by us as well.
Doctor, thank you very much. I think we can continue for 2 more hours, but this will be a great place to stop. And
thank you so much for being in the pulpit, and looking forward for next chapters.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this episode of Made in Israel. If you'd like to support the show, go to madeiniisraelpodcast.com and make a contribution. Anything you can give will be great. Right now, I'm doing this all completely independently and out of pocket. So any funds I receive are going to go towards making this a better show. Other than that, you can go on YouTube, make sure you like the videos, subscribe, write some comments, and share them with your friends on social networks. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.